Hi, everybody. Right, I've got just 10 minutes to tell you about something really big and exciting for the BBC, and that's a new typeface. But I've only got 10 minutes to do it in. This is a project that I've been involved in. I've driven from day one, and I'm really excited to tell you all about it, so I better get cracking. If I gallop, forgive me. So, yeah, that's me. So I'm creative director of user experience and design at the BBC. More specifically, I'm the creative director of our global experience language, which is our shared design framework with which we design and build the organization's entire online output. What my team does specifically is we facilitate, collect and publish all the great work that our designers do around the BBC and all of the different products and services. What I mean by that is like a product or service might be children's or sport, news, weather. We strip them back to guidelines and we publish them on our GEL website, which is bbc.co.uk/GEL. And they become like reusable guidelines so people can do their work more efficiently and consistently and spend more time innovating new experiences online. That's a very quick explanation of what I do. Got any questions about that, ask me afterwards. The world that I came from is very different to the one I'm in now. So I spent 16 years designing stuff like this. I spent 8 years with the Designers Republic, who were a very famous design studio during the 90s and the noughties. And then I ran my own studio for a further 8 years called Kiosk, which did more of this kind of work. So this was all graphic design, art direction, and branding for music industry, fashion, gaming, TV, media, all that good stuff. But the level of craft that's involved in user experience design is no less than in this world. It's just a different kind of practice. It's more iterative and human-centered rather than instinctive and artistic. So I inherited this global experience language, this design framework, and typographically, it only offers 2 typefaces. One is Gill Sans, our master brand typeface, the corporate font for the BBC. This is a humanist typeface. Maybe some of you know what that means. A humanist font is one that has fluctuating stroke widths in every character. It kind of echoes the calligraphic human touch. And the other font that we use predominantly, especially online, is Helvetica. This is what's called a grotesque font. And this has got much more equal proportions. It delivers information very clearly and succinctly without fanfare. And because designers love this typeface, me included, it's very popular and therefore there's a lot of it in the world. So it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And that means that if you kind of want to be invisible, you would choose Helvetica. Now, one could argue that's the right typeface for the BBC, an unbiased public service, but we've got sort of bigger ambitions than that. We need to be reaching out to a wider audience, especially when we're in such a competitive marketplace that we find ourselves in now as everything's going digital. For us to remain vital and relevant and all those good things, we need to appeal to as many people as possible. Also, these 2 fonts are quite different. So here was an opportunity to bring about a more consistent typographic approach for the BBC, speak with one voice across all of our different touch points. We're not the first to do this. There are many organizations, peer organizations, that have done this successfully already. They've commissioned and implemented their own typefaces, and that has strengthened their brand and improved their reading experience for their audiences. Something else I should say about Helvetica, and that's the font that we use for our reading experience, is that it doesn't perform well on digital screens of today because it was designed 100 years ago for print. So we constantly get accessibility issues with Helvetica. So here was a chance to improve that. Right, so we had to prove this business case to the organization. We had to take this idea to the executive board, to Tony Hall and everybody else. And we focused on 3 key things that the font needed to do that the organization would benefit from. The first was legibility. It had to be more legible, hence what I was saying earlier about it working better on digital screens. it had to be more visually distinctive. For this font to work properly, really, we should have a number of different styles. So we were looking to commission a font family, a bit like The Guardian did with their Egyptian font. So a range of personality and tonality. And thirdly, save money. This is the BBC after all. We're always looking to save money. And that was kind of easy to do because we pay licenses on a number of different typefaces, Gill Sans and Helvetica included, but then there's an enormous amount of fonts which we pay licenses for use across seasons and initiatives and campaigns and marketing, etc. So this was an opportunity to reduce that spend significantly by owning our own typeface. So this was considered a no-brainer. Why aren't you doing this already? They screamed. Well, they didn't really. But, and this was a question that I'd been asking for a while, and so we kind of got the green light to go ahead with this. We put the call out to a number of different typeface designers in the UK, all of whom were fantastic. But Dalton Marg, who are based in Brixton, been going for about 25 years, sort of ticked the most boxes for us. They instilled the most confidence in our stakeholders, of which there are a lot, as you might imagine. Bruno Marg, who runs that agency, famous typographer, he really understood the challenge that we faced because he had done this sort of stuff before for other media organizations. And their portfolio spoke for itself. You know, they're great at multilingual typeface design. We were going to have to consider lots of languages. They're great at legibility and readability, so they designed the Bookerly font, for heaven's sake, which is the font on the Kindle. And also they're good at distinctiveness. Rio 2016 is just an example of that. So we assembled a steering group. We got together like a group of key stakeholders from across the business, so they were from executive general managers through to engineers, designers, visual journalists, accessibility specialists, design researchers, etc., etc. And off we went to Brixton to Dalton Marg's studio to begin our education. So they're great at sort of teaching you about typography. We learned so much. We learned about its history, its craft, its importance, but not just the aesthetics of type design, but also how the brain cognitively absorbs words and letter forms and reads. So we did a number of card sorting exercises where we explored the different themes around what Britishness is. We also looked at our typographic legacy as an organization and looked at different typefaces from around the world. And interestingly, unconsciously, we sort of selected 3 typefaces that were classic British functional typefaces, that these rose to the surface. We didn't know that was going to happen, but they did. So Baskerville and Charter are both serif typefaces. We don't currently serve serif typefaces up to this point, so that was interesting. And then Gill Sans, which is our master brand typeface, that was familiar to us. But all of these had open counters, lots of breathing space, sharp connections. There was a kind of a trend and a pattern that we were seeing, and Dalton Marg explained all this to us. So anyway, they gathered all this information and they went off and started working on a number of different concepts. And they came back to us with 7 different concepts, which we had to whittle down amongst ourselves to 3. We had 2 humanist typefaces and 1 grotesque typeface as well to choose from, and we asked them to go away and work further into this. So they did that. They went away and looked at different languages and character sets that we would potentially be commissioning in the future, Cyrillics and Devanagari and Arabic, etc. And then they brought back to us prototype typefaces that we could test in our engineering systems and different technical platforms to make sure that they were working well. We whittled these down to 2. So we had a grotesque and a humanist font. So the race was on between these 2 styles of typefaces. They exploded them out and gave us 2 of each of those for us to choose from. It wasn't easy. We had every single character explained to us, and we were all scrutinizing the detail. It was fascinating. It was very nerdy, but lovely. I mean, I love being nerdy about stuff. And seeing general managers who have nothing to do with design getting nerdy about typography was a joy. So we eventually, after much debate and furious conversation, we settled upon one, and this was the prototype which we took forward to be developed further. It's a humanist typeface, and that somewhat bucks the trend a little bit because most digital organizations seem to be creating grotesque typefaces. And maybe that's because designers like Helvetica or they like that kind of style of typography. But our stakeholders were leaning towards a humanist touch. It was better for the reading experience. It had a certain amount of flair and classic appeal to it. So we were very happy. There was an HR appropriate group hug, and we went off, and Dalton and Marg went off and started and took the font into production. And late this spring, we took delivery of our new typeface, and it's called BBC Reith, and we are delighted with it. So I'm going to show you some pictures of it. So here is the sans family, from the different weights, light through to extra bold. We've subsequently commissioned a medium weight that will sit between the regular and the bold. And these are sort of, so again, it's a contemporary humanist typeface. It has open counters, generous proportions, lots of breathing space around every character form. And I know this is in the fine detail, and I realize that this font isn't exactly like, wow, look at that typeface, I've never seen anything like that before. But that's kind of the point. We weren't looking to make an enormous visual statement here. We are the BBC. We're to appeal to everybody. So it had to be, it had to balance sort of contemporary form with function. Its proof would be in its performance. That would prove its significance over time. So here's the serif family, again, those weights again. And here's the range of choice that we now have. We didn't have this before, especially online. And that's where all the BBC's going, remember. We had just Helvetica, regular or bold, or if you were really kind of like looking to roll the boat out, light. So anyway, yeah, so we have all this choice now, and it's very exciting, and our designers are tickled to get cracking. Here is the sans family in its complete state. I'm sorry I'm rushing through this for type fans out there. And the serif family. And Sport, BBC Sport, actually commissioned an extra family member, a condensed sans, so we've got a regular and a bold of that. Sport, this summer, some of you may have noticed, rolled out, in fact, you had an article on this. It's nice, that's I'm hopeful that you all know about this already. What am I even doing here? Anyway, so BBC Sport rolled out this summer, and they harmonized their brand between the TV and online world because there was a disparity between the two. And they seized the opportunity to implement the sans font in their thing. Right, launch. So here's some pictures of that. And it's great. And this is early days for the font, but already we're seeing a kind of a modernity happening, a real kind of, for us, this is incredibly exciting. I mean, to the lay eye, most people won't really notice this, but to us and to type fans, they will spot this. And we've had really great feedback, thankfully, because we get a lot of negative feedback. Whenever anything changes to the BBC, my goodness. But it's going well. And technically, it's performing well as well. We're running loads of user testing on it to collect the data, to learn more about how to best exploit its capabilities. So yeah, so that's where we are. And this sports launch has lit a fire underneath all of the other products, and they're all now in planning and scheduling in and experimenting with Reith to get it rolled out in their products. So expect over the next 18 months to see news, weather, iPlayer, radio, music, all of those great products to come out and start using Reith. One final thing. So we called it Reith because John Charles Walsham Reith was the original creative director. No, he wasn't the creative director, for heaven's sake. He was the original director general of the BBC. In 1922, he kind of pioneered. He basically came up with the concept of independent public service broadcasting, and his mission was to educate the masses. And given that reading and writing is a fundamental component of learning for most of us, it seemed fitting to take his name. And to be fair, I actually suggested the name, but not for that reason. I actually suggested it because I thought it had a certain elegance to it, don't you think? So that's why we called it Reith. And that's it. If you want to know more about it, there's going to be a film made about it, which is going to go on our GEL website. I urge you to take a look at that. If you can't wait for that, this Thursday coming at the department store in Brixton, myself and Dalton Marg will do a much deeper dive presentation about Reith for those of you that might be interested, so do come along. And that's it. Thanks very much.